we jump to the idea, oh, all nations. That is why Jesus is upset, is because who? Jesus was upset because who the market was affecting? The Gentiles. As it records in Mark, my house shall be a house of prayer for all nations. And in the temple, the market had been set up in the court of the Gentiles. Jesus could see the connection very clear here. The people who are being affected by this market, this buying and selling and trading of sacrifices, was the Gentiles. They were not being allowed to focus on God. Which we should be aware, though, is a little bit of a side to this whole thing, is the court of the Gentiles is a relatively new innovation by Herod the Great. If you know your Old Testament well enough, and there's so much to learn in there, do you know that Solomon's temple did not have a court for the Gentiles? Yes, he does pray that nations will look towards God's temple and he will hear them as they pray towards the temple. But he has no temple court. This is Herod's a great innovation. He was like, the Jews clearly want a Jew-only zone, which that's what they created in the temple. And there was plaques on the wall between the wall from the court of the Gentiles, in which clearly said that anyone who violated and walked into the temple area would be executed. Their blood would be on their own heads because they had been clearly warned not to do it. But Herod was like, no, I want to build a temple in which all people of the Roman Empire could come and admire and worship. So he created the court of the Gentiles surrounding the temple. And it's large. The entire temple complex is about 35 acres big. So roughly, this is like a mid-sized mall in your local community. Well, a bigger mid-sized mall. No Mall of America, but still a very big complex in which the temple worship was set up. And in this area, the largest section of it was the court of the Gentiles in which the market was set up. But this is the Achilles heels, in my mind, of why Jesus probably didn't do this because of the Gentiles worshiper. First of all, the Gentiles never seemed to be a large focus of his ministry. Doesn't seem to be the overwhelming heartbeat of what he's doing. He often goes out of his way to avoid the Gentiles if you actually follow his ministry in the Synoptics. But back to the Synoptics. So we have Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Mark reads, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made a den of robbers. And right away, we jump to the idea, oh, all nations. That is why Jesus is upset, is because all nations cannot use the temple to pray and offer sacrifices. Interestingly, Luke, who's often called a writer to the Gentiles, is it's a much more Gentile gospel. He misses it. Luke records, it is written. So this is Jesus yells out, it is written, he said to them, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. What? What gives? So here's the writer, the author, who's particularly writing his gospel for Gentiles. He has this big incident in which Jesus does something for the Gentiles, and he forgets to name it. Just doesn't seem very logical. And even Matthew, and if you go with the whole idea that Mark is the earliest gospel and Luke and Matthew work off of Mark's original gospel as they develop their stories as they know them, why would they have looked at that all nations quote and go, not important? Well, maybe it wasn't important. Maybe they didn't see Jesus' incident in the temple as being about the Gentiles. So they dropped that part of the quote because it wasn't that important. And they might even thought it would distract the readers from understanding what Jesus was actually trying to accomplish at the temple.